The Packers season has reached a point that just a few weeks ago we may not have thought possible. Win, and they are in after a victory over the Minnesota Vikings. We'll talk all about that, what's to come in Week 18 versus the Lions, and so much more. All coming up on this Week 18 edition of The Final Dump.
News dump.
News dump, yay!
News dump.
I mean, that's kind of a loaded question.
It's a landslide!
It's The Final Dump, presented by Game On Wisconsin. We are live and ready to go and get ready for Week 18. Got all the graphics set now on the live stream. I'm Brendan Brzezinski. He is Matt Freilich. The Final Dump is finally back following a big win over the Minnesota Vikings for your Green Bay Packers, 41-17. The Packers somehow, some way sit at 8-8. That Jeff Fisher shit with 1 week to go and one more divisional game against the Detroit Lions. It could be winner take all, or at the very least, it is win and you're in if you are the Green Bay Packers. We didn't think all that long ago this was even possible, but we have gotten to a point with a hot streak over the last few weeks, maybe a couple lucky breaks along the way, but a defense that's playing its best football, special teams that all of a sudden is competent, and an offense that's slowly but surely finding its footing. Matt, there's a real chance the Packers play postseason football, and I'm at a point, I don't care if they face the vaunted 49ers, who we just hate seeing in the playoffs. I don't care if it's Minnesota. I don't care if you have to face 4 teams at once in the first round. The fact that the Packers are even in this position, it seems crazy, to be completely honest with you, but I'm happy that we've hit this point.
Crazy is a good word, honestly. I would never expect this, whipping off the last 4 in a row, and just truly, you look. I look back in the schedule, towards the end of the season with the schedule, and I thought the Minnesota game was a huge pivotal game. Also, the Miami game, but I really thought the Minnesota game, just because it was an NFC divisional game, and it just it would help their odds to win that game more. And obviously, as we know, as it comes down to it, it significantly did improve their chances over some of the other wild card foes in the hunt, whatever analogy you like to do with the in the hunt squads right now, which has been fun to watch over the last few weeks. But yeah, it's incredible. Honestly, I felt like there was a little hope after that after the Cowboys game, having been at it. It just seemed like there was a little bit more zest in that team. Christian Watson, obviously that was kind of his part of his coming out party. But at the end of the day, no, I didn't expect them to get to this point. I thought they would have fallen, possibly the Rams. Obviously that was before Baker was there. Possibly to Miami. It seemed like they should have lost that game. Truly, they probably should have if Tua was healthy through the rest of the entire game. But albeit, this is where it's at. This is the end of the season, and this is what things are looking at. Win and get in. And it always seems like these scenarios, I love that they have it as a divisional game, how the scheduling has gone over the last couple of years. It makes it even much better. You would never have thought you'd have to beat the Lions to get in and they could get a playoff chance, but ultimately that's where we sit. And lots to unpack from the last couple weeks.
Unpack. I like what you did there. We have so much to get to on the Final Dump today. We'll break down the entire win against Minnesota, the most fun, dominant win for the Packers all season long. Talk about the offense and the fact that it's still slowly but surely getting into a bit of a rhythm. The defense has played well over the last couple of weeks. Special teams, Keyshawn Nixon, just give him the MVP award at this point. The NFL needs a most improved player honor, so we can go to a guy like Keyshawn Nixon. We'll talk about all that, and of course, we'll look ahead to this weekend's matchup, Sunday night football. It was announced earlier on Monday. It will be Sunday night football for Week 18, Packers versus Lions, and we'll get to significant to some. I do want to do something very symbolic here, Matt, on the Final Dump on our first Week 18 live stream. So I was already rocking the Undertaker t-shirt today. Everybody knows, whether you're a wrestling fan or not, the gif, Undertaker sitting up, looks like he's out, and then he sits up and his eyes roll back in his head and all that. So already that's kind of the Green Bay Packers season. They were down and out. Should they start Love? Should you bench Rodgers and then trade him because he's trash and washed and all that? Now the Packers are in a spot where they can make the playoffs. So we are already at Undertaker position. But, and I do this every year when we get to playoff time, usually it's on Mondays after a playoff win or before a big playoff game. But we've got the You Gotta Believe Super Bowl 31.
Oh, I love it.
Cut-off sweatshirt.
Love it.
It is back. It is
love
prime time to get into playoff mode for the Green Bay Packers. We've pretty much been in the playoffs 3 weeks in a row now with all these wins. Get it all in. Take it all in. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to believe, cut off and everything.
Oh,
1990s vibes right here. 96, 97, Super Bowl caliber vibes. Matt, I've been waiting to do this all day. I've been waiting to put on Gotta Believe, my friend.
I respect it. What led to the sleeves being cut off? Was it when you were just in a bulking phase at some point? Is that what we had to happen, or what happened?
Actually, and believe it or not, this is a gift. I've got a good friend who's got a bunch of family up in Wisconsin. I'm trying to remember exactly what town it is. It's up near Green Bay. And she came back Christmas one year and said, "Hey, I got you a gift." And I think she found it thrifting. It was just cut off.
Hell yeah.
You Gotta Believe Packer sweatshirt. And it is playoff mode. It is playoff season. I'm nervous about Sunday, but I'm trying to bring as many good playoff vibes as we can get heading into this matchup with the Detroit Lions. I figured, what could it hurt? And at this point, to be honest with you, Matt, like, even if this all goes for naught, like Packers lose this week, or you get to the playoffs and you play San Francisco and get your ass kicked, whatever it ends up being, this has been a remarkably fun month of football. And given how awful the vibes were just a few weeks ago, I've already been impressed with how the season has ended relative to how most of the season has gone to this point.
It was a shit sandwich in the middle of October, November, right? It was just bad. And like, finally it's turned the corner. There's some stuff that's still not 100% the way they need to be, but some of it's like exceeded expectations. I would say like defense and special teams for just a couple, aspects of both. But yeah, it's been a wild ride, man. I just honestly can't believe we're in a position to make the playoffs at this point. It's crazy.
It truly is crazy. Well, let's dive right into it with all of the talk from this weekend. The Packers take on the Vikings. I think a lot of people were a little taken aback by what the spread was going into this game. Packers were favored by 3.5 points. Well, man, Minnesota, they're probably kind of fraudulent. That record is probably a little extreme for how good they actually are. But man, and it's at Lambeau, but the Packers are favored by 3. Packers have a losing record, all this. They came out and they beat that ass all over the field. And it was amazing, Matt, because the first defensive series looked awesome. They came out 3 and out, looking great. Get the ball on offense. Okay, you don't go anywhere. Fine, whatever, early in the game. Punt gets blocked. And I said it on Twitter right away. This went to shit quickly. Like this, oh my God, all the great vibes from the defense gone in a hurry. But the defense was still great. The defense had another great stand on the goal line, only giving up a field goal there. The defense was great all game. The offense took a little while to get going, but eventually it started to find its rhythm. What stood out to you the most about this win over Minnesota in Week 17? Was it anyone in particular, any phase in particular, or was it just the overall ass-kicking nature of the contest?
I would say it's just like, where's this defense, like this strategy been in the past, right? I mean, I know we were told after Week 1 they weren't going to able, mid-game implement the Jair on an island with Justin Jefferson. Okay, that's fine. I still don't fully believe that, and it's tough for me to, fall off of that stance and that opinion. But I'm just so shocked. Like, if you can do this to the Minnesota Vikings, and honestly, one of the more prolific wide receivers in the history of the NFL from his first couple of years, right? Like, how can you not do this against other teams going forward? And they also have other weapons. Dalvin Cook, TJ Hawkins has had a good year. Adam Thielen. I mean, a lot of it, I think, has to do with the offensive line play for the Vikings that was super banged up. But I was just really, really impressed from the defense and how they just stood their ground. Like you mentioned, they had the first, they had the 3 and out, but then they have the short field, should give up 7, somehow don't. Have a great goal line stand, only give up 3, and that was really the only significant points that were given up throughout the entire game. There were some cheap touchdowns towards the end. But I think this defense right there is one. Special teams to get a kick return is unbelievable. Like the last one to do was Randall Cobb, as everyone knows. Like that's nuts. Unfortunately, that block, it's kind of like makes you a little bit sour. It's like, oh, we had such success on the special team side. We return a kick. Finally, Nixon gets into the end zone, should have had one in Miami on Christmas Day. But still some of those blunders there. But I really want to say, like, besides the defense and that small special teams, I think it's just like crazy to see. I would call it a complete game. Besides the block, I would call it a complete game. But besides the offense, like that's what's standing out to me is like every other aspect of this game, you're getting so many gifts and so many things that are going your way. But it's just like that offense still can't really like push itself over the hill. And maybe that's what we're waiting for is just Rodgers goes on a tear here a couple games. And that's what it ends up being. It's finally he elevates the game or the offense elevates the game. But it's crazy to see all these aspects. You win just every aspect of the game besides the offense was just like anemic. I mean, it was decent. It did okay, but it just wasn't those, like, from the Rodgers standpoint of like just being elite as what we've expected, but getting contribution from everywhere else that was pretty significant to me.
I don't think we have seen an effort from this Packers team all year long that was that complete. I mean, you go back and look at any of the wins over the course of this season from the very beginning of the year. You take a look at the first game against the Bears, hell, the second game against the Bears. You didn't see a full 60 minutes offense, defense, special teams to some degree playing in sync. You know, Buccaneers win. Well, certainly not. That was a hideous game. Two really good offensive drives. The defense played well, but most of the second half of that game was absolutely hideous. The Patriots game, 27-24, there were a lot of ups and downs in that contest. Even in the last few weeks with the wins, again, second Bears game, I don't think was that kind of game. You beat the Rams. That was something of a team effort, 24-12. The Dolphins game, you didn't play a full 60 minutes in that one, at least not at a high level. This was from start to finish, every single phase in sync with one another, with, the obvious ups and downs that come with, random NFL games. But to see that to a degree that we haven't seen all year, to play like we have seen the Packers play the last two seasons, number one overall seed in the NFC kinds of seasons. That was really exciting. That was really encouraging. It was fun, man. I mean, that is the most fun that I've had watching a Packers game this season. And I think part of that is because it's Minnesota, and a lot of us hate Minnesota. For a lot of people, Minnesota is the bigger rival than Chicago is because the Vikings have been better for the majority of our lives. You and I, same age, better than the Bears have been for most of our existences on this earth. So that obviously makes it feel good, but there's just so much to be excited about, to be happy about. Now, with that comes the downside that there are going to be extreme takes. I saw this right before the show. Maybe I don't know the exact timestamp on it. We can pull it up here. It might even show in this. But this is from the NFL on ESPN. They tweeted this out. It was a clip from their Monday Night Countdown show where Steve Young, the great Steve Young, great on the football field, not as great of an analyst, says who they've become. You can make a case for the Packers being the best team in the NFC. Look, I'm excited about the way this team is playing right now, Matt. I am. I think that is extremely way over the top. But by the same token, I mean, people are taking notice. This team is starting to put it all together. And we'll get to some of the specifics coming up here in just a moment. But, you look at all the evidence, this team is playing its best football at the most important time of the year. And whether it pays off or not, it's hard to say. But that's all you can hope for, right? Is that going into the playoffs or a possible berth in the playoffs, you're playing your best football.
Damn, didn't expect Steve Young to just crown the Packers. I mean, I think there could be a conversation to be had with that. Like, haven't had, knock on wood, a lot of significant injuries toward this end of the season. You could make a case that the Eagles, obviously, depending on the status of Jalen Hurts when he comes back, like, is he still going to be banged up with that shoulder? Obviously, the Vikings, I still think, are a really good team. They were due for a game like this, and that's kind of what the line, I think, reflected that. There's a lot of people all week that were just saying, Vegas just knows, Vegas knows, and halfway through the game, I'm like, damn, Vegas is smart as hell. Like, I was shocked that I'm just, Steve Young, not surprising. Yeah, it's good for him trying to get maybe on the right side of history with his analysis game. Like you said, way better football player than he is analyst. And then Todd Varney, of course, will not be wearing pants to Lambeau on Sunday Night Football, as we know he would never do such a thing.
Never.
But really, like, they're just not. They're not the best team in the NFC. I wish they were. There's aspects that make me feel really, really, confident in the team. Defense being one. But outside of that, like, it's tough to really think they're the best team. But hey. Never a bad time to start hitting your stride towards the end of the season, ever. It's always great to that's how you want to finish. You want to finish hard, finish strong.
We'll get to more on the Packers here in a moment, and it is going to be a little tough to transition from this. I do want to bring it up. We stream the show live. Obviously, if you're watching live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, wherever it might be right now, we appreciate you. Thank you. If you're watching us, you might not be watching Monday Night Football. You might not have the sound on, know exactly what's going on. Defensive back Damar Hamlin of the Buffalo Bills just suffered at what looked to be a truly terrifying medical issue on the field. I'm not going to speculate exactly what it is. You could see him stand up and then just fall down. According to some reports on Twitter, they were administering CPR on the field. I don't know that they're going to continue this game. It obviously doesn't mean anything for the Packers, but Just wanted to bring it up. I don't know how you continue playing this game if you're either team, but if you're watching the live stream, you don't have Monday Night Football on. Thought that might be some important news to break to you. If you're listening on Tuesday, or beyond on the podcast, you probably already knew, but that's very scary. And obviously, if you're the praying type, prayers for DeMar Hamlin, I'm sure would be encouraged and welcomed. That is a terrifying, terrifying scene. We'll try to keep it positive here on The Final Dump with Brendan Dworzynski and Matt Freilich, as we're talking all things Green Bay Packers. 8-8 Packers. They pick up the huge win over Minnesota this weekend. And Matt, to further the conversation about this team playing their best football at this time of year, I do think we should start with the offense. I don't think anyone right now is saying, hey, look, this Packers offense is all of a sudden incredible. It's suddenly great, amazing, whatever superlative you want to end up using. But I think slowly but surely they are starting to get in a little bit more of a rhythm. They are starting to develop a little bit more of what they wanted to look like when this season started. They're getting closer to a point where they think they are maximizing their talent, maximizing their play calling, et cetera, et cetera. 41 points. Obviously, that was aided by the kickoff return touchdown by Keyshawn Nixon, who we'll get to on later. It was aided by the pick six by Darnell Savage off the tipped ball and a couple short fields off other turnovers by the Vikings as well. But I think this was a great example of the Packers getting back to where they hoped they could be this season. And granted, I don't think anyone would have told you, yeah, I hope that Aaron Rodgers goes 15 of 24 for 159 yards and 1 touchdown. Like, no one is saying, yes, that's my ideal stat line for Aaron Rodgers. But Aaron Rodgers did not have a great game. He was fine. He was all right. 15 of 24, 159. That's 6.6 an attempt. Had the 1 passing touchdown, 1 rushing touchdown. The offensive line was awesome. He only got sacked 1 time in the game. But he didn't have to be great, and the Packers were still able to win going away. You barely involved in terms of actual, completions. He did get 5 targets and a couple deep ball targets, but Christian Watson's been your best offensive player in the last few weeks. He had 1 catch for 11 yards. Obviously, you had a big day from Aaron Jones, 14 for 111. A.J. Dillon, 12 for 41, was the hammer at the end of the game. But I think the fact that you now have found ways to put points on the board, to find other ways to win and find offensive success, even if certain elements you were expecting to be great are closer to mediocre than they are to great, that's encouraging for this Packers team. That's encouraging for what the future could be for this team this year. Obviously, that future is going to come fast and furious. It's all on the line. Week 18, you lose, the season's over. You win, you're into the postseason. But I think that's also got to be an encouraging sign that they are finding multitudes of ways to get points on the board, even if Rodgers isn't great, even if Watson isn't balling out, etc.
Yeah, it's actually funny just to, like, you mentioned rhythm here in this lower third, and it's just like, you can see it. Like, you can actually see the momentum and the feel for the game to kind of be just becoming better with the offense. Like, that's something that I'm very optimistic by, because like previously in the beginning of the year, like that was never the case. It was, everything was out of sync. You didn't know who was even the main target. They couldn't seem to figure out the rotation between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon would almost be non-existent. Now it's like the only time you don't see Aaron Jones out there if he's still battling that ankle or that knee injury. And outside of that, like, there's still a lot more growth that can be had. You mentioned Christian Watson. Romeo Doubs really hasn't been existent since the Rams game when he came back. Didn't really do anything in Miami. Didn't do anything last night or last afternoon in Minnesota. So I think there's a lot more to be desired from this offense. But I mean, they're putting the defense is putting them in position to be successful. Like, that's the biggest part to me. And like, the offensive line has rolled with the punches week in and week out. Many speculated David Bakhtiari, if he were to go, what would happen with your boy Zach Tom. He ended up actually getting some supplemental time when Nijman went out with that shoulder. I'm assuming it was that, and he seemed to hold up fine on that right side. So ultimately, super solid performance from the offense the last couple of weeks. It's not statistically great or sexy by no means, but you can literally see the momentum, the rhythm, the sync that they have. And I don't know if, I mean, it seems crazy that one player, Devontae Adams, could put an offense just so out of whack. I mean, I know there's MVS and some peripheral guys that were there, but it just seems like, how do you lose all this like chemistry and everything that you've had for years and years? Like, and all of a sudden it's just like, it's a full reset. That just seems kind of strange to me. Maybe there's components that I'm, omitting, but it just seems like that's the main one that kind of is the common denominator of why this rhythm hasn't been there for the last, 2 months.
I'm a little slow to say that, yes, like this team has completely figured it out. It just feels, it feels a little bit like 2019 in the sense that it's probably going to take all year for things to really get solved and to really get things to a point where we're feeling like, oh yeah, like this is, this is what can be maximized from this group, from this talent, from this coaching staff. And I don't think we're going to see the full potential of what Rodgers to Watson can be this year. I think it's going to take more reps during training camp, preseason. Well, probably not preseason for Rodgers, but you know what I mean, come next year. I don't think we have seen the maximum of what Romeo Doubs can be just in general or with Aaron Rodgers. You see where I'm going with that, or even what this offensive line could be. And they've been good as of late, despite having a multitude of pieces in and out. You mentioned Zach Tom. Shout out to our guy, Zach Tom, for getting in there and playing some good snaps when Nyman got hurt this weekend. It's going to take, I think, a little bit more time to it all coalesce to be the perfect being that we want it to be, that the coaching staff, that the franchise, and the players as well, what they want it to be. But can it be enough? Because at this point, I'm not concerned about, well, is this team Super Bowl caliber? I'm concerned about, is this team playoff caliber at this point? And if this offense performs like this, if you get consistent, solid offensive line play, yes, that is a big deal. That is really good. You need to see that. Can Rodgers be smart with the football and good enough? We saw more examples of it this week. Some vintage, great throws. There was the one deep ball to Christian Watson that was batted away by Duke Shelley, the cornerback. It was an incredible throw. I mean, that's vintage Aaron Rodgers stuff right there. If he can be good enough, if you're getting some lanes for Dillon and Jones, if you can get Watson and Doubs, among others, involved enough, I think this team can beat anybody right now with the way they're playing, and that's the most important part of this to me. Now, can they do it when they get to the postseason? I don't know, but you've got to, as Mike McCarthy used to always say, you got to get into the tournament, and then anything can happen. So the Packers are still trying to get into that tournament. They're close, only one game left to do it, but I think the offense is in a good spot, or at the very least, and in fairness, this is an extremely low bar to clear, but it's the best they've been all season. And I'll take that at this point. Again, that goes back to the original point that they are playing better than they have, and you want to be playing your best football at this time of year. And I think the same thing can be said about the defensive side of the ball as well. And you were mentioning them just a moment ago, so let's just jump right into it. We've been hard on Joe Barry. I know I have been hypercritical of Joe Barry. I think a lot of people have, and I think justifiably so over the course of this season. But go back over the course of this 4-game winning streak. Packers gave up 19 points to the Bears. They gave up 12 to the Rams. They gave up 20 to the Dolphins. And they gave up 17 to the Vikings, who were the best team out of anyone in that group, even though they are fraudulent too. And 14 of those points, or at the very least 7 of them, came in complete, utter, total garbage time when nothing mattered and the game had been decided for quite some time at that point.
Right.
The Packers are giving up 17 points a game over the last 4 weeks. 4 games, 68 points allowed. I know they're taking on Baker Mayfield on his second team of the year when he had only been with the team for something like 9 days or 12 days at that time. I know the Bears are absolutely god-awful. I know Tua was concussed at some point during the Dolphins game. The Vikings game, there's not really an excuse. They just put it on him throughout the entire game. I understand you factor in the level of competition, but I don't care who you're playing, man. 17 points allowed per game is really darn good over any amount of time. I'm not ready to say, yes, we need to extend to Joe Barry on this coaching staff, but I do think you have to give credit where it's due. Guys are stepping up. Guys are making plays. You know who made a big play, who we've talked about this season, not necessarily always rising to the occasion? Kenny Clark. He was dominating on Sunday against Minnesota. Did he get a favorable matchup because they were on their third string center? Sure he did. He still took advantage of it. All you can do is play the guys that are in front of you. He did. He looked awesome. The defensive backfield, Jair Alexander, we could talk about him for the entire rest of the hour. He was obviously fantastic. Some of the other DBs, I thought Rasul played a really nice game as well. Amos had maybe his best game of the season. He's gotten to a point where it's been more good to solid game, bad game, good to solid game, bad game, as opposed to early in the year when he just looked like he was completely washed. So that's a positive, and I mean that in a complimentary way, that he's improving as the year goes on. You got to give credit where it's due, man, and the defense has done enough. They're getting to the quarterback enough. They are taking the ball away at a much higher rate than they did earlier in the season. And look, the Lions can play offense. Their offense is really good right now. They've got multiple weapons. Jameson Williams obviously can stretch the field. Goff has been sensational, way better than anyone expected him to be this year, even maybe the most diehard Lions fans. But right now, I mean, similarly to the offense, I think you have to put as much trust in the defense as you've been able to all season at this point, given how they've played this last month.
Yeah, like the defense. We could. I mean, like you mentioned, we could talk about Jair this entire episode, this from 0 to 60. Like easily could talk for 60 minutes. But I think there's just so many pieces from this defense that were really good yesterday. You mentioned Kenny Clark. I thought that strip sack was awesome by him. I still feel like the interior of that defensive line is getting better and better each week. You see Slayton, J-Ron Reed stepping up, Devontae Wyatt. I think he wasn't as much of an impact yesterday as previous games from what I remember watching in real time. Quay Walker, though, dude, like he is turning into a damn stud. And like they even talked to him on the broadcast, which is like the broadcast is talking about it like it's getting national attention, which is great because sometimes I feel like I live in my own bubble and I'm like, oh, he looks like he's getting better, a lot better than he was. But no, he actually is. Like I'm really excited to see what he looks like in this defense going forward. But across the board, man, like even like the edge guys, like even Justin Hollins had one where he probably should have contained Kirk Cousins a little bit. You're still getting contributions from Anigbare. Preston Smith's doing the best he can on the edge, and he's having a pretty good season being like the main pass rusher there that you would have thought going into 2022 outside of obviously Rayshon with the injury. But I really, really like where this defense is headed, and I think it's the best time of the year to start playing really good defense is like when it gets cold, can you stop the run? That'll be remain to be seen because they can definitely stop the pass. Like we've seen they can scheme it now. Like it's definitive fact that they can go out and scheme something up. Jair can play with some physicality and just be an absolute dog on the edge where the run defenses remain to be seen. They had a good week against Dalvin Cook and Madison, but like you mentioned, like that in that middle of that offensive line, it's really, really tough to say how much that impacted because I thought for sure there was a couple plays I'm like, dude, there's no like, I feel like you got to run that with Cook, or I feel like you got to give the ball to Madison on a short distance there. And like, they just weren't able to do that. But overall, like it was definitely a team effort on that defense. And even in the last couple of weeks, like you mentioned Amos, Devondre Campbell had that big pick versus Miami. Like there's a collective group of humans on that defensive side that are really, really coming together. It makes me wish that we still had an edge rusher like Gary or another guy that they maybe would have brought in the offseason, like what it could look like if they could get more of a pass rush. But I think they're making it do not with typical guys on the outside like we would normally see. A couple more guys in the interior, that's just uncharacteristic to the Packers.
I think for me, the issue that has been persistent ever since the beginning of the year, I mean, you and I talked about this during the preseason and training camp, is that there's not a lot of depth on this entire roster, but defensively specifically. Well, if you want to give roster depth credit, you say it's on the offensive line, obviously. But I think you're still worried about what happens if Anigbare misses time. You're running with Hollins and Jonathan Garvin. Like, okay, that's where although the former has actually been pretty good since he was picked up off the street from the Rams a few weeks ago. But you understand my point. Like you worry if you have to get behind Walker and Campbell in the linebacker core. You worry, if Jair misses time, what is that secondary going to look like? God forbid anything like that happens, but depth is still the concern. You just got to stay healthy enough through this week 18 game to, again, get into the postseason. You can live with it. You would like to, you're right, have more help at edge, I think specifically because getting after the quarterback is obviously going to be what's imperative. You want to hit Jared Goff this week. You want to get after them. You want to cause more havoc in the backfield, force bad throws, force fumbles, whatever it might end up being. And that gets me to the next point I want to bring up about the defense and all these takeaways that they have had. They obviously had a bunch of them against Kirk Cousins on Sunday. I mean, he was throwing picks. He did get screwed a little bit. A couple of them got tipped up in the air, but hey, that happens sometimes. The Vikings have had a horseshoe wedged all the way up their rectum all season long. Like it was a matter of time before they got a couple unlucky bounces against someone. Do you think that's repeatable? We talk all the time about how turnovers are so volatile in football in general, especially in the NFL. They're hard to predict. They're hard to replicate. A lot of times teams that create a lot of them for one season, it falls back down another season, sort of similar to sacks, although those are at least slightly more repeatable with pressures. Do you think the Packers can keep up anything like this positive turnover margin, this takeaway rate over the next week to get into the playoffs? Is that something they can repeat against this Lions team?
I think it's something you can strive towards, is like having a nose for the football, tipping the ball in the air. There is a lot to do with just some teams are destined to win. Like the football gods just seem to be in their back pocket, whether it's a ball bouncing the right way, this and that. Like, but I do think that like you are going to create your own luck at some point, creating those opportunities. I thought there was a couple plays that were really, really good by Rasul Douglas tipping the ball up yesterday. Like there's just plays that if you're continuously have it as a focal point, whether you're Jerry Gray, whether you're Joe Barry, like, hey, we want to be being physical at the offensive line or in the defensive line. We want to be jamming guys on the edge. We want to be able to break up a ball if we can't get to it. Hands up, right? They were knocking a lot of balls down at the defensive line. And I think a lot of that do with the offensive line that was out. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, if you can continue to, hey, anytime you're in the vicinity of a football, I want you either trying to punch it out. I want you to tip it up. Make that. If you can't make the play, allow the next guy to make the play. You don't have to fully you can get a half of a play success or a quarter of a play or whatever it is, but do your job. And there's 10 other guys behind you. I think that is a repeatable thing to do. If they can do it against the Lions, I'll be interested because I think the Lions offense is just this team is vastly different than it was in the beginning of the year. Even like when the Packers played them back in whatever that was, week 9, like they're just, the defense is coming along for them. And then also like just the way that Ben Johnson has that offense moving around, like I think it's going to be a tough matchup because they are getting healthier. They got Jameson Williams back, like you said, they're able to run the ball a lot more. I'm fascinated to see what the defense looks like. And if they can keep that, I mean, I don't see how they could fall off. I think it's maybe they can't convert as many turnovers, but they're still going to be flying around to the ball and still be making some plays where they're going to keep that point total on the opponent like lower, where we should win the game with 24, 21 points.
If you're looking back at Jair Alexander's season, and this will get to a broader point, what would you say are the 2 best games he's played all year?
I mean, it's the ones that he's talked the most, right? It's been the Bills and the Vikings game, which is like, to me, I'm like, I honestly, that Bills game was good. However, like late in the game, it was like, okay, like you're still talking. We're down quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Like you are making plays, but like Diggs still had a decent game. This was like head and shoulders. This might be his best game he's ever had that I can remember. Like taking down a Justin Jefferson like this and hitting the gritty on him, absolute savage move. Probably should have been a flag if we're being honest. But like I would say it's those 2. Nothing else really sticks up. There could be one I think that could supplement the Bills one, but I think that's those 2 that come to mind right away.
And that's the exact point I wanted to get to, is that this Packers team was keyed up for this game. Yeah. You could tell from the very jump. They were juiced up. I want to say, maybe I saw this on Twitter, or maybe it was mentioned by either Nance or Romo on the CBS broadcast. I mean, you could tell Kenny Clark was in it. He was on fire. He was locked in from the very beginning. The entire defense was, and I think the offense was too, even though it took a little time for them to really get going. Remember, they had 14 points when they had 14 total yards of offense in the first quarter of the game. But the defense was ready. They were amped up. They were prepared. They were mentally in the zone for this game. And Jair Alexander, I think, is a perfect example of that. Yeah, he was talking trash all week. He makes that comment about how week 1 for Justin Jefferson was a fluke. If you come out and you play poorly after a comment like that, it's over, man. Like, your trash talk no longer has any sort of weight, anything like that. But he backed it up. He was phenomenal all game long, shutting down Justin Jefferson and just playing phenomenal football in general. That's the kind of thing that the Packers need to feed off of. That's the kind of thing they need to be able to replicate. Not in a way that it's reckless. I think an example of that, going back to the Bills game, Quay Walker's personal foul on the sideline when Matt LaFleur said, hey, you can't be doing that. That's not the kind of thing you can do. That's getting too turned up, I think. But if you can harness that energy like they had against Minnesota, if you can follow the lead of a guy like Kenny Clark balling up front, or certainly Jair on the back end playing well, you can harness that, you can deal with that. That's the kind of thing that's repeatable. That's when you are locked in mentally, when you've got your focus at its apex. You can get after the quarterback. You can make certain plays happen. That's when you can concentrate, get the tipped balls intercepted, strip the ball, whatever it might end up being. I don't know that you can necessarily replicate turnover luck. I don't know that you can necessarily, well, by definition, you can't, but you understand what I'm saying. I don't know that you can necessarily replicate, hey, we got 4 turnovers or takeaways this week. Let's just go get 4 the next week, or at least 2 or 3 of them. I don't know that you can do that, but I am confident that you can control. Every high school coach of any sport has told us this forever. You can control your effort, control what you can control, and we know that you can control your effort. But I think that very basic principle applies to this defense too. Lock in, be ready. If it takes Jair talking trash about Amon-Ra St. Brown and talking trash about Jamison Williams as well leading into this week, fine, do it. Whatever it takes to be ready, to be prepared for this game, I'm all behind it. So repeat those things. Repeat the things that you can control repeating, and I think good things are going to come from that, because I think it's fair to say there were a lot of times earlier in the season where it looked like the Packers weren't really focused, whether it was a coaching issue, whether it was Aaron Rodgers doing whatever he's done for a large portion of the season, defense having issues with coaching, play calling, positioning, effort, whatever. This was a great example of what this team can look like when it's locked in. You've got to harness that. You've got to repeat that. And if that takes, again, Jair talking lots of trash, Rasul Douglas chiming in, whoever else, I think you've got to harness that and repeat the things that you're able to repeat. And speaking of being able to repeat things, is there any cooler stat? And this really would have been valid last week too, before he had the rushing or the kick return touchdown. Is there any cooler stat than Keyshawn Nixon returning kicks for like a half dozen weeks or fewer and still leading the NFL in kick returning yardage, and then taking that and returning a kick 105 yards for a touchdown in a rivalry game, what felt like the first kick return touchdown for the Packers in forever? I think it was the 2011 Randall Cobb kickoff return. I don't remember one since. That one obviously sticks out since it was the first game of his career. He was awesome again. He's unbelievable. He is a true spark plug, lightning bolt, whatever you want to call him for this team, that adds that sort of momentum. And outside of the blocked punt, which was obviously bad, and we saw the stat a few weeks ago that the Packers have allowed more punt pressure than any other team in the NFL this year, which not a great look for Rich Bisaccia's group. But other than that, man, I think they're playing better. The kick return coverage was not great in this game. It had some moments that were good, some moments that were down. Opening up gigantic holes for kick returners, that's a positive, something that has not been around in a long time. The overall aura around the special teams, better than it has been recently. I know this is something that you particularly have been focusing on for a lot of the season, going into this season as well. What do you think is the state of the special teams unit right now? Are they playing well enough that you're feeling confident with this group heading into a do or die game?
Honestly, until like the last 2 years, I've taking kind of special teams for the Packers is just like, meh. I've mentioned Tremont Smith before that they acquired just to try to not get a record busted on them 1 year. And like, outside of that, dude, it's like everything is just such a guarantee to me. It's like Crosby's going to do what he does. I was blown away. He hit that 56-yard at the end of half. I would have bet a lot of money that he wouldn't have made that kick in Lambeau, in the elements. And just like, he makes the kick, but like, in the last 2 years, I've really come to just understand, and I think because Packers fans and just even the coaching staff had to call for it, is just between the snap, the hold, the kick, the whole entire process, like there's a lot to go around it with just field goals and extra points. Then you have punt coverage, then you have punt, like be able to block, and it's just I like where it's going. It makes me more optimistic. There are just still some flaws there. It's like almost like I don't remember getting so many blocked kicks or punts really ever. I mean, once in a while there'd be one, but like not this significant, not where it's like almost every other week. We also need to face the facts that we are getting towards probably the last year of Mason Crosby. Like if you like, that was his first kick, I believe, above 50 that he had made all year. So it's like, you can't continue to roll a guy out there that's, one, can't kick a ball over 50 yards, two, can't really even kick off. Like, we need him to be kicking the ball in the end zone. And it shows when they're activating the other kicker. It's like that means something. Granted, I don't know how that worked. He got injured or whatever the hell happened. He couldn't go out there and roll. So strange. But end of the day, I think it's much better. It's made strides, just like the defense has. Like, the defense was kind of brutal at the beginning of the year. You thought it would have figured it out earlier, just all the talent, but it's made some strides. I think there's a longer way to go to being a top caliber special teams unit, as if we are already a defensive unit like that. And it's a little bit more a little more you want, because Bisaccia was brought in, paid a shit ton of money. They're bringing a bunch of other special teamers, and we're still having these issues. That is a state of concern for me, because it's like, damn, like you invested not a ton of just resources overall, whether it be money, roster spots, tryouts, practice squad guys, whatever. And we're still having issues. Like Darren Levitt, for example, got blown up on that punt block, and like, he's your guy. He's supposed to be your ace, Rich. Like that's kind of sucks. Like that's disappointing. So I guess it's just small things, it seems like, need to be figured out. We have that spark finally on the return game, which is amazing, but I'm not trading that, that's a huge spark. Like a guy that's 290+ returns in the last 2 weeks, like that's insane. But I would much rather have a little bit of a safer special team unit, knowing that a guy can maybe get 20, 30 yards at a crack instead of having this like home run hitter where we're still falling short on other aspects that you need to kind of win games. Like you can't have it where you can't kick the ball deep in the end zone. You can't have it where you can't make long field goals, and you can't have it where you can't block for your guy to be able to have an opportunity to punt it or kick it.
I think for me, the positive spin, and not that, this isn't 2021 or 2020 bad special teams for the Packers, which again, like we were talking about with the offense earlier, the bar is so freaking low in that regard, but it's not quite that bad. The thing that encourages me and the thing that has me feeling optimistic for the special teams unit outside of being obviously a complete homer is the fact that now you actually have at least a handful of guys who you can trust to make plays. Like punt team, for example, Pat O'Donnell. I know he hadn't had a punt block since I think they said 2009 on the broadcast, but Pat O'Donnell's a fine punter. I've got more trust in December, January 23 Pat O'Donnell than I did in January Corey Bojorquez a year ago, right? Like I don't think he is going to completely wilt in the cold weather like Bojorquez did last year. I mean, shoot, he played in Chicago for a long time. He should be prepared for that. You've got a kick returner now in Keyshawn Nixon, who I still cringe when I see him take the ball from deep and not just call for a fair catch and just take the ball to 25. I certainly did on the kick return touchdown on Sunday, but you've got a guy who's a legit returner. You're not, and unfortunately, I'm going to say this, and I will knock on every piece of wood here that this isn't famous last words, but you don't just expect him to fumble every single time he catches a punt or catches a kickoff. He might at some point, and obviously that would be horrible, but with Amari Rodgers, we got to a point where we were saying, yeah, it's going to end badly. Like, this is not going to end well. It's going to be a disaster. You don't feel that with Keyshawn Nixon. And hell, if you need an extra safe punt returner, throw Randall Cobb out there. You can go back to old reliable. He's fielded punts enough this year. He'll probably be just fine if you need to throw him out there temporarily to fair catch a couple of punts. Crosby, inside 50 yards, I'm pretty comfortable with him on field goals, pretty comfortable on extra points to this point. Again, I don't want to jinx any of this because the vibes have been good recently, and I'm terrified that I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to come back and dread it if things go south on Sunday night. But the long distance kick, as fun as it was to hit from 56 with the doink over the crossbar, wouldn't try that again. I don't think I would go for that again coming up this weekend against the Lions, for example. The kickoff thing, yeah, that's obviously an issue, and if Ramiz Ahmed is legitimately hurt and misses time, that's tough because I figure they brought him up with the assumption that, look, we got 2 games left. We can use the standard elevation, get him up for the last 2 games, plus maybe a playoff game if we get there, and we'll be okay with the kickoffs. If he's legitimately hurt, well, that plan is obviously out the window. So I think there's reason to worry, Matt, but I also think it's fair to say, and if you disagree, totally fair, I just think that the fact that there are guys on this roster special teams wise, when you consider Nixon and O'Donnell and Crosby on field goals inside 50 yards, and even throw in Dallin Levitt, who, yeah, maybe has not been perfect this year, but overall is a solid core special teamer. I think you've got enough guys that you have at least a little bit more faith in that phase of the game, at least, again, compared to the absolutely below the earth's crust bar that was special teams the last few years.
Oh yeah, I have a lot more faith. That's no question. And I even think, to be a little bit more optimistic, like even just like punt coverage, I think has been really solid. Like I felt like punt coverage the last couple of years have been atrocious, whether it was effort of tackling, effort just like getting down there. I feel like that's been significantly better. Yeah, we'll see what happens with Ahmad. Like if he's hurt, like that's could factor in a little bit, especially if there's some more outdoor games come fingers crossed playoff time. I don't think it'll be too much of an impact this week. I don't know what the Lions return unit looks like. They need that extra, but like indoors, or excuse me, it is outdoors again. So it's like, it might be helpful to have him there, but ultimately, like, yeah, it's definitely made strides. Like, don't get me wrong. You had to have improved. Like it was just so bad for a number of years.
Yeah.
It had to have gotten better.
No, there's no doubt about that. So let's take everything we've talked about today, Matt, all the great things from the Vikings win. And that includes that Crosby kick, by the way. We didn't mention that earlier. That kick really was awesome. And it really was everything's going our way. Everything's going against them, where their NFC special teamer of the week, Greg Joseph, missed a couple of kicks, and you got Crosby out there hitting crossbars and getting field goals. That did feel pretty good. But with that, let's look ahead to Week 18, taking on the Detroit Lions, who were left for dead earlier in the season. And I think rightfully so by other fan bases, national media, whatever. I mean, they were 1-6. Jared Goff was pretty much a dead man walking. They hadn't brought Jameson Williams back. Their offense was obviously good, but their defense was horrendous. All of a sudden, we've played 16 games. The Lions are 8-8, same record as the Packers. They own a win over the Packers this year. And in retrospect, how painful is that 15-9 loss from earlier in the season to this Lions team? They've been good. Their offense is really good. They've got playmakers. Obviously, we here at Game On Wisconsin love Jamal Williams. They've got a formidable group, stable of running backs in the backfield. You've got the pass catchers we mentioned in Amon-Ra St. Brown, as well as Jameson Williams now, who's still playing his first few games. Their offensive line is very good. Goff, like I mentioned earlier, is playing well. Their defense is still not good, although they balled out against the absolutely putrid Bears this week. What are your expectations for this game? And maybe to make it a little more micro here, what are you expecting the Lions' game plan to be for the Packers on either side of the ball this week?
I don't know what to expect from this game. And I'm going to honestly, I'm going to take some time here before we wrap this show and just give our predictions. I do think the path to success for the Lions would be to be established to run, get get Swift, get Jamal Williams in action. But definitely don't think that you can't spread the ball around. Like we already mentioned, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Reynolds, they got guys that can sling the pill to if they need to. So it's they're going to be able to move the ball effectively. I don't think you need to be, intimidated if you're Ben Johnson or, Dan Campbell. I think this offense is going to be able to move as it needs to be. But I would first execute okay, typically Packers' soft point is that interior of the defensive line, run the ball. We're able to do that. You mentioned the good offensive line. I think they have a really damn good offensive line. Continue to establish that and see if you can, find a path to success there, because we don't know what the elements are going to be like on Sunday. There's a sleet rainstorm coming tonight in Green Bay. So it's who knows what it's going to be like. Over, a week ago, there was a blizzard. Now it's 40 degrees on a Sunday and Monday afternoon. It's just, you have no idea what to expect. So if you're able to run the ball and have, a little bit more control, I think that would be huge for them. But like you mentioned too, the defense, I think for them has been, I think it's turned around quite a bit. I think the defense has been a big point to where they've been able to, make some plays. Hutchinson's been really damn good in the last couple games. They don't have a great talent on defense. They have a couple pieces that are good, but I think they've been able to keep their head above water. They have yet to give up they've only given up really 3, 4, a couple games over 23 points in the last half of the season, where previously they'd given up 45, 24, 35, 27, 27. They only have a single game where it was over 25, and that was against the Bears, which ended up winning the game. But that was 2 months ago. I think the defense is a lot better. I don't think Packers score only 9 points. That would be crazy to think at this point. I also don't think the Lions only score 15 points. I think that's kind of an outlier for them. So at the end of the day, I expect it. Honestly, I want this to kind of be a shootout, because I think that's would be great. I don't think you're going to stifle this Lions offense again. It sounds crazy, but I think if they have the same approach that they did versus the Vikings, they could, but I do think it's going to be some heavy points scored in this one.
Yeah, I think the number one key, and this is going to be one of those obvious things, but I think the number one key for the Packers in this game, you got to hit Goff. You have to get to him a lot. And to pair with that, you got to be able to stop the run game. Our guy, Iowa Joe, in the Game On Wisconsin YouTube comments just mentioned that he Jamal Williams, is just shy of his first ever 1,000-yard season. He has been awesome this year. He's getting close to breaking some Barry Sanders scoring records for the Lions team. He has been tremendous this year for Detroit. You've got to be able to shut down that run game. You have to take that away, make the Lions one-dimensional. I know I'm giving you all the classic, nobody who actually pays attention to the game kind of cliches here, but you've got to dance with the one who brought you here, right? Get after the quarterback, hit Jared Goff, put him under pressure, force him to make bad throws, and allow that back end, Rasul, the safeties, Jair, obviously, the rest of the guys in that secondary, allow them to come up and make plays. Are you going to get burned by Jameson Williams in this game? You probably are. I would not be shocked one bit if there's a big play touchdown to him. Amon-Ra St. Brown going to catch 9 passes for 115 yards. Certainly possible in this game. Can you keep them out of the end zone, though? Can you hold them to field goals? Can you avoid giving up too many of those big plays? Because we know the Packers offense, while it has had problems with the deep ball at times this year, some interesting play calls trying to go deep when maybe they don't need to this year. There's been kind of a lack of rhythm with play calling and execution at times. You don't want to get into a shootout, I think, with this Lions team. So to me, it comes down more to the defensive side than anything. Now, offensively, you have to value the football here. Rodgers was, again, fine in the game against Minnesota. I think you would like to ask for a little bit more than just fine. Like, can we get to the good threshold? If you're talking bad, mediocre, okay, fine, good, great. Can you get to like fine to good somewhere in there? Because if you can do that, I think you've got enough with the running game. This is not a very good run defense for the Lions. Can you get Aaron Jones going? A.J. Dillon in the fourth quarter, pounding the rock, burning clock, getting into the end zone, things like that. I mean, the formula that got you here, the things that we know work for this offense. And I'm not as strictly, oh man, you've got to run the ball 40 times a game. I'm not one of those people, but can you get Rodgers to play efficiently? 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, something like that. Can you get to that point while also running the ball effectively? I mean, we just talked, I know I talked a lot about how it was a group effort against Minnesota, and you had to have everything coalesce and come together and gel exactly at the right time. You need more of that in this game. You've got to have a good day for your offensive line, because don't look now, but Aiden Hutchinson, he's got a real argument to be defensive rookie of the year. I know it's probably going to go to Sauce Gardner in New York, or it's going to go to Tariq Woolen in Seattle. Aiden Hutchinson has been awesome this year for this Detroit team, especially over the last handful of weeks and as the season has dragged on. You got to be able to hold them off up front. You've got to be able to make plays through the air. I mean, if you can run the ball 40 times and it works and you win, okay, so be it. But I assume you're going to have to make at least a handful of plays in the air. You've got to be able to get pressure on the quarterback defensively, which is a tall task, because that Lions offensive line, we haven't talked about them a ton so far. They're really good as well. That's a really good group up front led by Penei Sewell. You've got to win those matchups in the trenches. Again, I know I'm giving you super meathead high school football coach cliches here, but I really do think in this kind of game where you need to win on the margins, you cannot leave anything to chance. You have to play that sound, smart football, and I think that's going to be the number one thing the Packers need. So that brings us then, Matt, to our favorite segment every week. When the degenerate is never a slur, it is significant to some. At last glance, and we can look to see if this line has updated, the Packers were favored at home in what our pal Dan on the Game on Wisconsin YouTube comments is telling us could be about 18-degree weather on Sunday Night Football. Okay. Packers are favored at last glance by 4.5 points. That is a sizable amount. The over-under has jumped up to 49.5. So I will let you take the floor, Matt. Packers favored by 4 and a hook. 49.5 points is the over-under. What's your gambling spread prediction and your winner prediction for this weekend?
Damn. The 4.5 makes sense. I think that's fair. The 49 is wild. That's crazy. That's the highest total for the weekend besides Raiders Chiefs, which is also strange that one would have a high one based off the Raiders game they had. Pretty solid. I'm going to go Packers. You got to go with a win. I thought about this last night. They're like, there's no way I could predict a loss. That would be the absolute craziest thing of all time for me to do that. So they're definitely going to win. I'm going to say that the Lions cover. I have a number in my head, and it sounds insane, and I'm going to run with it. I'm going to say 31-30. And I know that sounds absolutely insane, but I just want to throw that out there. I'm just going to say 31-30 Packers, pull it off. I think it's going to be an absolutely insane, because I think the Lions, this is a different Lions team as we've come to know. And like, I just think the only caveat to that is like, Matt, how did you just see them being the Packers defense lock up the Vikings offense, and then all of a sudden they're going to go around and give 30 to a team that's, not that same caliber? Like, how is that possible? Not sure. I think the Lions are going to fight for it, so I'm going to go 31-30.
I've got same spread-wise predictions for you. I'm going to say the Lions cover 4.5. I think it's going to be a very close game, because these two teams, one, they're going to have either a ton to play for because it's winner take all if the Seahawks lose during the day, and if not, if the Lions are already eliminated because the Seahawks win earlier, you really think that Dan Campbell's team is going to just roll over and die?
No.
You really think that the team that started 1-6 and is scratched and clawed like the Packers have in the last month, like that team is going to just quit and roll over and just say, oh, well, we're out, so we're not going to try anymore? No, they're going to go balls to the wall to try to beat this rival team, this Packers team that generally has owned them over, well, the course of history. But they already got one win. Talking about Green Bay, they are going to be amped up to play. So I do think this is going to be a close game. I'm going to take the over as well. I'm going to give us 51 points. The total is 49.5. Matt, you went to 61 points. I'll give you to 51. 27-24. I'm going to say Mason Crosby, game winner in the cold. We get one of those great Evan Siegel shots of him and Aaron Rodgers cheesing at each other, big toothy smiles. I'll say Packers end up with a win. It'll be a close one. I think the Lions are going to play a good game. I hope the Packers are ready for it. I am going to be honest with you. I am sick about it already. I am sick to my stomach over what this game is going to look like come Sunday night, but I'm excited for it. We've both got the Packers to win. You can follow along with all our reactions leading up to the game and during the game as well on Twitter. He is at Matt_FRA_. I am at Brendan DZW. And of course, make sure you're following Game On Wisconsin across all your social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Make sure you're checking out the podcast version of The Final Dump. It comes out live every single Tuesday after the show, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, all the other great shows, podcast-wise, live stream-wise, across the Game On Wisconsin network. Matt, this is fun. It's been a couple of weeks since we were able to go live here for The Final Dump. It is exciting that the Packers have put together this little winning streak to give us some hope and some excitement going into the end of the season. Hopefully, next week is not a full season recap. Hopefully, it is a look ahead to a potential playoff matchup. I'm nervous. I hope you are at least able to enjoy the game, because I'm not entirely sure I'll be able to.
Pivotal game here, man. It's really bizarre to think it's coming down to this. I'm excited that it's kind of going to be a standalone game, right? SNF, no holidays mixed in, no New Year's Eve, nothing like that. It's literally like, when in you're in, I'm going to be beside myself all weekend. And like Matt LaFleur said, I know economic times are tough, but don't sell your damn tickets to Lions fans if you're not going. Make sure to hold them tight to your chest, give them to a Packers fan, or whatever you need to do. But because I think it's going to be an apps. If you're going to that game, I'm envious of you. I will not be. Just don't need to attend it, but it's going to be great. I'm very, very excited for Week 18.
As they like to say, as we like to say, get loud, Lambeau. You know Matt LaFleur is going to be preaching it during his press availability this week. If you're at the game, be loud, have fun, get excited, stay warm, and hopefully make at least a little bit of an impact on a Packers win over the Lions. We will talk to you next week one way or the other, hopefully after a Packers win and playoff berth clincher. But until then, for Matt Freilich, I'm Brendan Dworzinski. This has been another edition of The Final Dump, brought to you as always across the Game On Wisconsin network.
Well, Wayne, I think this is one that Vince Lombardi and George Hallis would be proud of.
You could have given me the touchdown. Then it's hard to overturn. You know what I mean?
I understand.
That was a good effort, though, wasn't it? It's a pretty good effort.